welcome. And we're going to do a little bit of, I decided we would do a little bit of Torah Temimah this morning. So let me get that up for you. Here we are. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And as you can imagine, the reason why I wanted to do this is because we have this absolutely golden saying, Tzedek, Tzedek, tirdof. And I thought you might enjoy just seeing some other approaches as people meditate, at least as Baruch Halevi Epstein meditates on this verse and shares with us various quotes from the rabbinic literature on this particular verse. So here we are, right? Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Perhaps what I would do is go back to the original verse and just look at the entire verse, right? Tzedek, tzedek, righteousness, righteousness you shall pursue. Lema'an tichyeh. So there's a purpose for it, right? You're given a reason for it. Lema'an tichyeh, so that you should live, survive, right? V'yirashta et haaretz, and you should inherit the land asher Hashem Elokecha, which the Lord your God noten lach is giving to you, right? So interesting. I mean, there's certainly lots to meditate about in the wording of this verse as well. The fact that tzedek is repeated, that's a biggie, right? And then I was thinking, as we were looking at it right now, that on the one hand it says God is giving you this land, but now it's take possession, right? Inherit. So there's a distinction, right? On the one hand, God can give it to us, but does that mean we automatically receive it? Does it mean we in fact inherit it? So there's something, in receiving a gift, there is something active that you're doing there. It's not just passive, right? Do you need to deserve it, etc.? Just a few little questions. So here goes. So this is from Pe'ah. This is from Zra'im, Mishnah Zra'im, and has to do with agricultural laws. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Kol mi shetzarich litol min hatzdaka. Anybody who needs to take from the from charity, let's translate it that way, right? Anyone who needs to take from charity, ve'eino notel, but he doesn't actually take it. He doesn't take the charity. Alav hakatuv omer, concerning this person, Scripture states, Baruch hagever, blessed is the man, asher yiftach b'Hashem, who trusts in God. And now we go on. That alone is something to consider, right? What the implications are of that particular verse. To what degree do you trust God, right? As opposed to having to take from charity. V'chein dayan, and likewise, a judge, shedan din emet la'amito, who judges a case to its utmost truth, right? With utmost care and truth. Shene'emar, as it says, so they've compared the dayan who judges a case with absolute veracity is compared to someone who is required to take from charity but doesn't take it. Okay, this is something that raises questions, right? And how do we know this? What's the proof? Shene'emar tzedek tzedek tirdof, because it says only righteousness shall you pursue, right? And the idea of pursuing means it isn't a slam dunk. It is something you have to really, really go after. You have to toil, you have to work, you have to put effort into it. It's not going to come easy peasy. Yes. Comment?
Yes, regarding not taking charity, I definitely understand the concept that you may trust that God will provide, so there's no point in availing yourself of the charity, on the other hand, it's a mitzvah for people to give for charity,
Yes.
and you would be sort of denying them that ability to help you, which is, good for them. And there's nothing wrong with taking charity. And also that joke about, the drowning guy complaining to God, and God said, well, I sent you the boat and the rope and everything. Well, God's sending charity, through these people. So if trusting in God and taking charity shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
So yes, and of course I was thinking of that joke when I read this, and I think there's a tension. Sometimes the joke makes it out as if there's no tension, but there is. And I think that's okay. It's okay for there to be a certain tension here as to what degree you need to take it. And I think, again, remember, circumstances alter cases. And, certainly the Torah is not telling a person, that they should starve. But we often, the oral law deals very often with gray areas. And that's what this has to do with. Is, on the one hand, it would be very convenient to take from charity, but to what degree? So, we have to recognize that reality has shading and it has gray areas. And to what degree do you try to find other ways rather than taking charity to support yourself or to take care of that? So I think this is exactly the point, that things aren't black and white. There is some tension there, and one has to use some judgment regarding that. But so let's take a look at that point. If you feel I've responded adequately, we can go on to the Baruch HaLevi Epstein. Lauren, let you respond if you feel you would like to.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So let me look at where the reference is, and this is pay bet. Pay bet is right here. So Nil'u HaMefarshim. So what it says is the commentators struggled the Faresh Mishnah. They struggled to explain this Mishnah, Behemshech Ha'inyan, in the way it continues, in other words, in its progression, midin hadayan lakan. In other words, what on earth does this have to do? What is the business of the judge judging honestly have to do with taking tzedakah if you don't need, of not taking tzedakah and trusting in God? What does the one have to do with the other? That's the question he's asking. And they struggled. So here we go. V'li nir'eh. And he says, to me it seems, pashut, straightforward, the hakavana, that the intention here is the dayan shedan din emet la'amito, that a judge who judges a case truly, honestly, every piece of honesty, ve'eno noseh panim, and doesn't show favoritism, leva'alei dinim, to any of the litigants, doesn't show any favor, ve'gam eno yarei mipnehem, and likewise is not afraid of them, not afraid of retaliation on the part of any of the litigants as to how he judges. Ulefa'amim, and sometimes gam sovel hezek. There are times when the judge, has to in fact incur damage, v'tsa'ar, and pain mizeh, from this. Right. I remember, some of you in St. Louis know Pat Cohen, and Pat Cohen and I know each other, and I remember her telling me that the worst day of the week for her, and she's a judge, and has actually had a rather successful career in that regard, she says, I think the worst day of the week, she said, is Friday. I think it was Friday. And the reason why it's such a terrible day of the week is that's the day they pass sentence. And passing sentence is such a painful thing to do. So anyway, just thought I'd share that. Gam alap. So it's being a judge, right? Being a good judge, being an honest judge, being a judge that is going about it in the right kind of way, right? Not just seeking power. Gam alav hakatuv. Regarding this person, the scripture Omer says, Baruch hagever asher tach b'Hashem. Blessed is the person who trusts in the Lord. So that is the comparison. In other words, both of them, both the person who declines charity, even though they could take advantage of it, and likewise a judge who absolutely is careful about being a true and not showing any favoritism. The consequences of those things are also, they're both emotionally and possibly even physically very, very hard, very hard. And you have to trust God that what you're doing, that God is going to support you in your decision, right? Kamo al zeh shetzarich litol. So he's comparing the judge to just like the one shetzarich litol mitzdaka ve'eino notel, that really could require to take from charity and doesn't take it. She'erech shnehem shaveh, that the characteristics of these two, or the value, erech literally means value or the valuation of the two of them, both sides, shaveh, are equal, be'inyan zeh, in this particular regard. Shetzrachim levriot, because in fact they depend, right, on their fellow creatures, uvachol zeh, but nevertheless, ein botchim bahem, they don't put their trust in them. They put their trust in Hashem, the source, the judge of truth. V'gam samich asefa dekra, and you could say that, that both these statements are in fact connected to the continuation of the last part of the verse, lema'an tichye, in order that you live or thrive, v'yarashta et haaretz, and you take possession of the land. What I love about this is, one of the things I love about it is, of course, just how loudly it speaks without, this isn't dated stuff. This stuff just deals with life as it really is. And I was thinking to myself also that, here you have the Torah verses several thousand years old, right? We have Rashi, right, from the Middle Ages. We have Baruch Halevi Epstein from the 19th century, 20th, maybe early 20th century. And here they all are having a conversation on one page. That there's something, for me anyway, so powerful about the fact that this transcends, lifetimes and ages. And it can all speak to us today.
I have another question.
Sure.
Well, it's interesting that they're using someone, and I would use the word needs, but someone who needs charity and doesn't take it.
Yes, okay.
But why would they use that example as opposed to, like, let's say a leader of a country who goes to war to accomplish a goal? Why don't they just trust God, and even though maybe war is necessary to them, that they don't go to war and they trust God to take care of things? So, what I'm saying is, it strikes me that example is a little bit weighted, and it seems like the other example would either be more fair by itself, or maybe both kinds of examples would, show that it's a whole variety of situations.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a complex question. I would think in terms of perhaps certainly the one who requires charity is across the board. In other words, the number of people for whom that situation might speak to might be greater than the number of leaders who have to make decisions as to whether to go to war or not, if I'm understanding you correctly.
But those decisions affect so many people.
They do. But we're talking about now, maybe, sorry, I think I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. So I think on the other hand, the decision, yes, you're right, of course. The leader, a leader does affect so many people. But I think the point in this is to not just talk about one person, but to try and maybe spread the message and the lesson on a pragmatic level to more people than might be the one regarding the leader. As true as that is, I mean, as you were saying what you were saying, I was thinking to myself, it's so true. There's so many examples of what it means to trust in God. In other words, anytime, well, certainly if you face adversity of some kind, if you choose to trust God when you face adversity, and try to understand it, say, as part of a divine plan or God's justice in how you are encountering life, and trusting that God means it for the best. I mean, there are lots of different examples given, right? But I don't know that if it's a contextual thing. I mean, the fact that it does continue, that you may long live upon the land. Your question is a great question, Lauren. It's exactly the kind of thing that we're supposed to do in trying to really acquire our studies and our learning, is to ask these kinds of questions and see if we can come up with answers, because it throws us into a deeper level of dealing with the text. So, I don't know that, I mean, I'm struggling obviously to answer your question, but at least on a prima facie basis, that seems to be the case, that the examples given might affect more people than the specific example that you gave. Although I suspect you could come up with other examples that also might affect more people.
I have this similar problem. My takeaway is that you should never take charity, because that will make you more righteous, but your children are starving. So I think they chose the analogy wrong. I think they didn't dig deep enough to find a proper analogy for this.
I think I can answer that one, Golda.
Yep.
The temptation to take charity when you don't even really need it, right? The temptation to take the easy way out. But I think it's also, gosh, at least based on Baruch Halevi Epstein's interpretation, because he talks about, depending on other human beings, right? Or putting your trust in other human beings, which is what the verse is talking about. And I think that is in fact something that is pretty universal, is that people put more of their trust in other human beings and human agencies than they do in God.
But but you said that, people might take when they don't need it, but it's actually specifying that this is someone who does need it.
Yes, that is. But remember, I told you, need, quote, quote, is a shaded issue.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be real honest about it. It can be very subjective as to how much one needs something.
So the translation of the word might be a little different.
I'm not sure.
All right. The nuance of need.
Yeah, I think
it could be a different type of a word that doesn't exist, or something or an idea that we don't quite grasp.
So Golda, I go back to a comfort place for mine, which is at the very, very beginning. And there are times when the way I explain these things is to say language is an approximation, right? Language is not necessarily, it's not like mathematics. And the reason, and when we use the term need, it could also be wanting to engage us and give us an opportunity to play around with this very concept as we are playing around with it. And trying
because if we're going to struggle with anything in this, it's the word need.
Yep.
And what is need and what is want? What is the difference between need and want and desire and survival, etc., like that? So
precisely, right? We know that classic
I'll
thing
take that.
What you need as opposed to what you want, and how we love to blend the two, and sometimes we say we need it when it's really because we want it, not necessarily because we need it. I think we need to allow that. I mean, I think that's the way to look at this as a living, as a living text.
Well, also kind of looking at this the way I'm viewing it also is it's the degree of which you examine, your need, right? It's both the person that examines their need for charity, right? Like you said, do I really, is this a situation that's so dire and I've exhausted everything else that, now I need to, or I have to rely on my fellow man or person to be able to exist. And then, from a judge's perspective, right, have they exhausted all of their thought process to make sure that, they've gone through this and not considered, other people as a factor as opposed to just doing it through law, right? So it's the degree to which you've actually gone through the process and have made that effort versus, so that's how I look at this is, have you gone through that effort, right? And, or have you just said, oh, I need this, or I'm already done with this case, so I'm just going to move on, versus actually taking the time to really think it through.
I think that's a great example, David. I think it gives us an additional way of making the comparison between the two examples and showing the similarity. It's a little bit of a different approach than Baruch Halevi Epstein was suggesting, but I think it makes total sense to me as to, I think that really in fact sheds light on the word need, right? As in the process. And just to summarize in a sense what you're saying, because I'm not making a new point here, right? That just as a judge has to really examine himself, his motivations, how he's operating, etc. Likewise, someone who's in a position of requiring charity should go through the same process.
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing you say, and I think you're right. I think that's a great way to compare it. That's different from what Baruch Halevi Epstein was suggesting. It's great. It's good. I think we're gonna. Let me just stop the share. Okay, go ahead.
I think we just saw the evolution of Torah Temimah.
Well, I wonder if people, not the person who needs charity, but the other people who are giving charity, have gone thoroughly through the process of trying to figure out how to make life and resources more fairly distributed, and whether the leaders going to war also are thoroughly examining the process of what it would take to have better relations with other countries and prevent the need for the conflict. And I think in both cases the answer is no, and it's kind of making the burden, like, I think, on the person who needs charity.
Well, yeah, so
it's not that I don't understand the concept.
So let me make a point there, because I can't talk about the leader for war, but I will talk about the charity part, because I try to make donations on a frequent basis, and I also research who I give donations to. I use Charity Navigator. I've never found anything effective. To be quite honest, I do spend a bit of time trying to figure that out. Trying to figure out, will that charity actually distribute it? Are they spending more money on administrative resources than they are, and I'm not saying that this is I'm some sort of example of anything, but
that's actually, it's outside of my point though. The point is eliminating the need for charity and charitable organizations by looking thoroughly at processes in which to be more fairly dividing resources, so that not giving to charity.
Okay, so
giving to things that giving time, giving resources, as opposed to just
changing government policies, changing priorities about what's grown, where it's grown, how it's distributed, all kinds of things.
So please, I think David was still making his point. I just want to give him a chance to finish. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. The only point I was trying to make was I actually do try to examine it. I don't know if I think other people do as well. Otherwise, those services like Charity Navigator wouldn't exist if people didn't want to hold charitable institutions accountable. That was my only point. But I agree with Lauren and Golda that we should. It'd be great if we could eliminate the need for that in the first place by being able to better divide resources and the way things work. That's the of course the ultimate goal. So yeah, I don't yeah. Anyway, I'm done.
So it that whole area is like huge, right? It is so complex. And we know the stages of charity, right? That the best thing in the world, I believe, is providing someone with a job, right? Because the issue of a certain measure of how can I put it, self-respect, because taking charity in some ways sort of eliminates or destroys a person's sense of self-worth on a certain level, and I think in that way it sort of speaks in a less subtle way to some of the great issues that Lauren was bringing up and Golda about these sorts of things. So I think if anything, that one takeaway from this is that it sort of raises the whole issue of the relationship of both giving to charity and also being involved in a charitable organization and receiving charity. And unfortunately, there's just so many different sides to it, besides people who simply want to take advantage of people's generosity and stuff like that. So yeah, just raises a lot.
Then that person's not righteous at all anyway.
Well,
sure. It's like
I
Tzedek.
I know. It's most unfortunate, I think. Okay. So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording at this point and thank those people who have followed us through to this point.